and welcome to the webinar, Purpose and Meaning in Military Service. I'm Valerie Milroy, CEO of Voice and Vision Incorporated. For this webinar, Voice and Vision CompUR course program is partnering with the Stephen A. Cohen Military Family Clinic at the University of Pennsylvania. We are able to offer this webinar free of charge because of the financial support through a Veterans Trust Fund grant from the Pennsylvania Department of Military and Veterans Affairs. It's important to both Voice and Vision and the Cohen Clinic to offer this webinar on Memorial Day 2023 and beyond as one way to honor the men and women who died while serving in the U.S. military. We also value and want to support the families who have lost loved ones, those currently in the military, and our veterans. Just a little quick note to start about CompUR Core, because that program may be new to many of you watching. CompUR Core is a network of military veterans that connect with veterans living with behavioral health challenges through peer mentoring friendships to foster hope and offer support where needed. CompUR Core also helps connect veterans to needed services and resources. Through that same Veterans Trust Fund grant that I mentioned earlier, we were able to start a podcast called Untold Valor, Veterans Recovery in Action. Untold Valor focuses on veterans with stories of courage, recovery, perseverance, and strength. Veterans share their perspectives on what it's like to battle mental health challenges, combat addictions, and overcome other adversities unique to those who served. And that's where we met Darcy Rideout. Darcy, as she likes to be called, was on episode 11 of Untold Valor. Darcy is an Army National Guard veteran, mental health advocate, Cohen Clinic board member, and small business owner. It is my pleasure to introduce Darcy, who will introduce the panelists and lead the discussion. Welcome, Darcy.
Thank you, Valerie, and welcome everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today as we go into our discussion focused on purpose and meaning in military service, and also a few other topics surrounding mental health and what it means to support the community. I wanted to go ahead and introduce our panelists here. We have Mr. Peter Whitney, who is the outreach manager for the Cohen Clinic. We also have Dr. Leah Blaine from the Cohen Clinic, and our advisory board member, family representative from the Cohen Clinic, Nina Stinson, and of course, Reverend Ben from Untold Valor. He is the co-host. It is nice that you all are here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
I wanted to jump into our discussion today with a few questions for the veterans panelists who are here to give us an idea of why you chose join the branch of service you chose, and what meaning and purpose did you find while you're serving, and what is your meaning now that you're a veteran? What does your service mean to you? I want to take that first with Reverend Ben. Thank you, Reverend Ben. How are you?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Darcy. That's a good question. My situation is kind of funny because I joined the Navy because I didn't want to join the Marines. Okay, because I didn't want to be on the front line. I'm gonna just tell you the truth. But I joined the Navy, and then I became a hospital corpsman, and I became an FMF corpsman, which means I went to Marine boot camp after that. And the rest of my time in the service mainly was with the Marines. So to say that God put me where he wanted me, it made a man out of me, and I really enjoyed. I enjoyed the challenges that I got from the Marine Corps. It was more challenging than the Navy as far as physical fitness and different things we were doing, and more hands-on, up-front kind of stuff that things that I didn't want to do. That's why I didn't go in the Marine Corps. I ended up doing it anyway. But here I am today. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Ben. All right, and Pete, from what we understand, you were 30 years of service, and now you're our boots on the ground as the outreach manager. Could you also tell us what was your purpose in joining the branch that you joined, and what meaning does your service have now that you're a veteran?
Well, like Reverend Nelson, I had an interesting go of it. I actually joined the Navy originally. I had 5 years Navy, signed up when I was 17. I never really knew that I was going to do anything else. Got off active duty, went back to went to college, joined the reserves. The Army seemed to make a lot more sense because I was an air traffic controller on an aircraft carrier. not something I wanted to do on the weekends. I thought it would be a little bit tough. So I ended up being a medic, actually in the Army, in the enlisted side of the house, and a civil affairs sergeant eventually. And I noticed I was just getting deployed over and over again at that point in my life. So I went back to active duty, and I finished with just a little over 24 active duty, and those 5 in the reserve. So yeah, I would like to call it a potpourri of service, a little bit of everything. I got to do a little bit of everything, from living on an aircraft carrier to jumping out of airplanes to being in combat in Iraq. So it was an adventure. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and thank you for being here. So that's something that I have in common with both of you, being a veteran myself. I did join when I was 17 years old. At the age of 17, coming from Philadelphia and into the military, of course, like most young women who are of color coming from this type of city, I was escaping trauma just to find myself in new trauma. And that's what my service means to me now that I'm a veteran. It means that I have overcome years and decades of trauma to still be able to be who I am now. And I wanted to highlight that because there are people who believe that they have to suffer in silence when they do not. And there are people who believe that they cannot overcome their traumas or their adversities and be who they want to be later on in life. So thank you both for sharing. I thank you both for being open and honest about not wanting to do things up front and going on to do other things. But still, your service means a lot to us, and it means a lot to those who are watching. So I did want to take it over to our support services here, Dr. Blaine and Nina. Same question for you, but just on the other end. And I understand that you both support the military community. You also support the veteran community. That is how I met both of you. And I wanted to start with you, Nina, being a family representative on the advisory board for the Cohen Clinic. And could you tell us, what is your purpose in supporting the military or the veteran community if you don't support both? And what does your service and support mean to you?
Thank you, Darcy. So good to see you all. So I first encountered, my father served in the Air Force, but I didn't know much about it because it was just those few years, Vietnam, and he never really talked about it. He was just in the civilian world. So it wasn't really part of our culture growing up. And then in 1998, I was living in Sierra Vista, where Fort Huachuca is. And I found out about overseas opportunities working for the military. I was there as a teacher, working in Buena High School. So finding out, I'm like, that just sounded so fun, right? I'm like, ooh, I get to go work for the military and be in Germany. And so I went over totally different than what Pete and Reverend Ben are saying, just as a straight up adventure. So I got over there to work as the assistant director at a childcare program. And that really started my journey, learning about understanding and being embedded in the community. And that's where I met Eric, and we ended up getting married 2 years later in 2000, and so served active duty with him as a spouse for about 15 years. And then after he retired in 2015, so it's been around 7 years that I've been a veteran spouse. And I think when you're living through it, you don't really understand the unique experience that you're having because you're having it. And so you don't have that perspective. But now that we're out of the service and Eric is actively involved in supporting veterans with 4 Block in the space where he helps people transition out of service into civilian jobs, and then also thinking about spouses transitioning from being in the service to civilian jobs, and just how much of a unique experience. To piggyback off what you said, I know this is still an introduction, but that whole post-traumatic stress and that piece of it. But really on the other side is post-traumatic growth. And I think we don't talk about that as much, about that thriving in adversity and really the strengths that come from having a lot of the experiences that our service members and family members have had. And so I just really appreciate you for highlighting that, Darcy. Thanks.
Well, thank you, because we understand that is very important. It is important to understand where you've been, where you are, and where you're going, past, present, future. And I also want to thank you a lot, Nina, for bringing that. That is why I brought you on the panel. It's sometimes it's your expertise, the way you say things, the way you put things in perspective for us, that we have to take into account the social aspect of everything. But that's, like you said, that's the benefit of hindsight, is that it allows us to recognize the insight that we have when we're in the experience, so that when things happen in the future, we can say, hey, this is what happened, this is what's going on, and we can make those projections on how to do better. So thank you so much, Nina, for that. Dr. Blaine, thank you so much for being here. I am so happy that you are here with me. You understand that you and I have been working together for the last 6 years. You, I, and Nina have been working together for the last 6 years. And I was so nervous to do this, but I said, I need to call in some backup support, my home girl, Dr. Nina Leah Blaine, to help me in here, and Nina to get it all through. I understand that you worked with the VA in Maryland before you came here for like your internship.
Yep. Yeah. So my kind of journey to here actually started when I was coming up. I saw the way that trauma impacted those that I loved, and that was really my motivation, was to see, to understand why trauma impacted people the way that it did, and to see if there was a way to help in that healing and to get folks to recovery and as you said, Nina, towards thriving. So I was fortunate to work at the Center for Trauma Recovery at the University of Missouri St. Louis in grad school, and had the opportunity to really focus on some evidence-based practices, really learning a lot about how that trauma recovery could happen for folks if they had gotten stuck in that process, really focusing on working with survivors of childhood abuse and assault. And then, had the opportunity to work at the VA Baltimore, so the VA Maryland healthcare system, and learned that I could kind of marry two interests. So I could bring that passion for trauma recovery, working with individuals who had gone through things prior to service as well as during service potentially, and serve the military and then veteran community, which, had kind of been in the background for me. I'm a Korean War granddaughter. I grew up right by the joint bases in Jersey. So it was always something that was in my awareness, but like Nina, was not front and center for me. So had the opportunity to open a mental health clinic right outside of Fort Meade, tiny space in Maryland. And then about 7 years ago, had the opportunity to come up here and open the Cohen Clinic, and just absolutely love being able to make sure that our veterans, service members, and military family members are taken really excellent care of. And really excited to talk about some of those initiatives. But that purpose is so critical, right? I see that on our team, right? I think our team is so dedicated to doing the hard work because we know why we're doing it. We know who we're doing it for, and really helping our veterans who may have transitioned out and lost that sense of purpose and that sense of camaraderie, which are so meaningful in their service, to be able to reconnect with that and really use those strengths and thrive. So thank you, Darcy, for having me and for putting this together. I'm really, it's such an honor to be with you all.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for your support services from the beginning to now, and whatever you're going to do with us in the future. And it makes perfect sense for me that we all have this discussion together, given where we all come from, our meanings and purpose for service and the military, and also service in the veteran community. And that definitely brings us into our next topic. It is a question for the entire panel. And I wanted to highlight Mental Health Awareness Month because we all have had our expertise in what it means to promote mental health, what it means to reduce the stigmas, and what mental health looks like. So I wanted to start with you, Reverend Ben, because you were open and speaking about triumphs and how you found meaning in service. But now that you are a member of the church, a very prominent member of the church, so you serve in a different manner. I wanted to start with asking you this question. So why do you think it's important to discuss mental health and the stigmatization of mental health in the military? And why is it important for people to know about the mental health care resources that are available to them?
Well, number one, I believe you're only sick as your secrets. And I believe that it's a lot of secrets and things that take place in the military. And mental health is one of the biggest secrets. Because number one, we're men, and we're not weak, so we don't deal with that thing there. That's for So it's that pride type of thing that men have, and especially men in the military we are labeled as warriors. We're supposed to be strong. We're not supposed to. But really, to tell the truth, is a lot of wounded people who have not even been on the battlefield that are wounded in the rear, okay, with mental health. There's some stress in the military that doesn't always associate with going to war. Just being deployed from place to place can be traumatic on a person. 1 minute you're in Japan, next minute you're in Iraq, and you have your wife at home, and you're wondering, you don't know it's all these things going on. But to be successful and not find yourself getting depressed, I had to just focus on the mission and try to block everything out. And as I said once before, those kind of stresses led me to drinking a lot in the military, that liquid courage. And it just kind of like took off the edge of the worry of what's going on back home, and the stigma of mental health is something that needs to be lifted to save lives. Because I've seen and I've heard about a lot of suicide within the military, active duty. You don't hear about it on the news, but it happens every day. So, yes, there needs to be a conversation. There needs to be an awareness about mental health within the military. There needs to be a conversation within the military itself. It should be a part of the boot camp experience, if you ask me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, Reverend Ben. Pete, I wanted to swing this question to you only because your reaction while Reverend Ben was speaking, and I thought that it was very important to have a different male perspective. We heard what Reverend Ben highlighted most about this importance of what the stigmatization puts on men to embrace that masculinity of being tough, of suffering in silence. It's from the beginning. And I wanted to swing the question to you, Pete. So why do you think it's important for us to sort of reduce that stigma on mental health in the military? And why do you think it's important for people to understand what mental health resources are available to them?
Well, thanks for the question, and thanks for setting me up there, Reverend Ben. It's for me. I'll just start off with it's personal. Every unit since 2001 that I was in had at least one suicide. Sometimes it was somebody that I wasn't as familiar with or not as close to. Sometimes it was somebody that I was very close to, friends with, served with overseas, and really all of them could have been prevented in some way if they had just either known to reach out, so they knew that resource. You're talking about how important it is to have those resources and have people know about it. And that's I get to do that on pretty much a daily basis, is go out. So that's why it's personal. So that's one. And two is, even if you know those resources are there, which pretty much we're out. I mean, we're on TV commercials, you name it, we're out there. We're in news articles, you name it. Everybody knows there's some kind of resources. But that's what we're battling. The other side is the stigma. And it's like, you don't get it. Like, you're like, that guy took his own life, and you can't, it's unfathomable that somebody would actually do that when there are people who care about them. And I don't know if it's a suffer in silence thing or just an inability to communicate, or I wish I had those answers. But at least if we could take care of the resource side, and we could keep doing things like this, these podcasts, and let people know we're out there. It's so important, because it really is a shame. We lose so many good people that could have done great things in their community. They could have, the family they leave behind it's tragic. There's no other word for it, but it's being tragic. And there's not one really that hits me harder when I think about my Rolodex of the suicides that I've come in contact with, and the more we could do to prevent it, the more I'm on board.
Absolutely, thank you, Pete. I did want to highlight something specific that you said just now, and that is that we don't have those answers, whether it is the suffering in silence part, whether it's something else. I've come across a lot of things that said that suicide and mental health are very complex issues. However, if we understand the basics of complexities and chaos, we understand that the first start of solving a problem is to recognize that a problem exists. And I thank you both for being very open and vulnerable as to what men go through and what the expectations that society puts on men. And since we are speaking of the social aspect of suicide and the social aspect of the stigma and military community in general, Nina, I wanted to swing that question to you as well and ask you, as a support for those who serve, and you being with Eric for 20 years while he served, and you seeing everything that goes on, not only while he's serving, but when he comes home and he has to decompress. Why do you think it is important that we discuss mental health and the stigmatization in the military, and why is it important for people to understand what resources are available to them?
Thank you, Darcy. My head is spinning a little bit with all of the possible angles here. So yes, this is a very personal thing for our family. Eric served in a couple different roles. He was also the rear detachment commander at one point, during which time a family member did die by suicide. It was the spouse of one of the other commanders. So, and I hadn't really thought about that until Pete started talking, and I was like, oof. You know, we don't just have the service members who are dying by suicide, but also family members and how much that impacts. From the family member perspective, there's a lot of fear and shame, to piggyback off what Reverend Ben was saying. And for the family members, you're afraid of making the active duty person look some kind of way. You don't want to make them look bad. You don't want to have a problem, because if you do have a problem, then it becomes a problem for the soldier, the airman, you know, whatever it might be. And that message isn't just that's not a myth. I mean, that was communicated to us. That was told to us. Like, you have to stay in line, basically. And I think especially with children and, you know, a little bit of older children in high school, there was a real fear of doing something. So those regular risk-taking kind of behaviors that people might want to go through, you're not doing it because you're afraid. And there were families who got sent back to the States from Germany because of conduct problems of the children or the family. And so I think that's not always thought about, is how much you have to hold it together, and you have to be okay, and you have to perpetuate this myth of I'm okay. There's not a lot of space for it's okay to not be okay. I was really fortunate when I was in Schweinfurt with Eric. We had military family life consultants finally come on the scene, and that was those were some supports that it wasn't through the typical medical channel. You could get some informal support, and there were no records kept. And I think that freed up people to be able to have conversations, talk to somebody, and get some supports more informally. But the stigma was very real at the time I was there. I hope that it has shifted some, but I don't know for sure if it has. For ourselves, Eric, you know, when he was the RIDI commander and experiencing so much stress, there were times where he took himself to the ER thinking he was having a heart attack, and he was not, right? It was an anxiety attack. And so there was definitely that. And then that period of redeployment, when they come back, that heightened hypervigilance and looking around and needing to sit in a certain spot at the restaurant, and, you know, being nervous a lot, and nervous about my safety, nervous about our daughter Catherine's safety. One morning we were at Dick's McGuire Lakehurst, and I'm just upstairs showering peacefully, doing my thing, and all of a sudden Eric bursts into the bathroom. He had kicked the door in, Darcy, because he was worried because I didn't open the door. You know, I'm showering, I'm upstairs, I don't hear you knocking on the door when you're coming home from your run. But he was so worried and nervous that something wasn't okay, and why wouldn't Nina open the door, that he kicked the door in and come storming into the house in fear for us. So it's
absolutely it is. I tell my sons this all the time. One of the most powerful emotions that gets all of us is fear. It is the anticipation of pain, and that plays off the anxiety. I tell my sons all the time, if you call my name and we're in the same dwelling space, if you call my name and I don't answer, don't panic. You can always come downstairs and ask, look for me, see where I am. Something is not always wrong. And my sons, they just suffer from that type of anxiety where they say, Mom, you didn't answer your phone, or Mom, I was calling you, didn't hear me. Anything could have happened. And I have to, bring them back and say, hey, son, at the same time, nothing could have happened.
Yes.
Just that's not a sign of trouble or anything, but I know it's that fear. It's that fear that takes over a lot of our rationality. That's what irrationality is. It is reacting and behaving off of fear, our emotions, which makes perfect sense when you think about it, that we are in the military, we are trained to react. We are sort of conditioned to believe that we always have to be hypervigilant, as that was the specific word that you used. And it's very interesting from a clinical perspective. And Dr. Blaine, if you could close us out on this piece here with your clinical thoughts, feelings, and opinions on why do you think it's very important that we reduce those stigmas, and why is it important that we promote those resources?
Yeah, no, thank you. And I really appreciate what everyone's already shared. And I think, I often hear this duality that's when we speak about, trauma or struggling or mental health issues, and it's kind of versus striving and thriving. And, and it's, I think we can all recognize that in different spaces in our lives, we can be both all at the same time, right? I can be, rocking it at work and not feeling like I'm doing the pieces I need to be as a mom, or vice versa, right? Or I can be, totally on my game academically, but injured, physically, and not able to get through my workout in the same way, right? We are complex beings. And it is, I think it is that kind of reductionistic perspective, right? That unfortunately, our military is really just meant to kind of look at fitness, right? Like, can you or can you not execute these duties? Are you going to be safe to get out there? Are the people on your left and right safe, right? That's really, and that makes a lot of sense. And it's an admirable mission. However, that's not how humans work, right? So this idea that you cannot be fit to do your role if you have some stuff going on in the background is just, is it's a myth, right? Like it's just not the way that people actually work. And so I do hope that as we gain that more complex understanding of, how do we actually assess if what someone is going through does impact their fitness. And then we can actually get to that point of saying, like, it's okay to share these pieces, because we know that if you are struggling in a particular domain, it doesn't mean you're struggling in all domains. It doesn't mean you're not awesome. It doesn't mean you're not thriving. It doesn't mean you're not fit. It just means you've got a thing. And actually, if we can address it, we can probably get you even better, right? We can probably even enhance that and thrive more, or kind of get to that other side. So I do hope that as a culture, and hopefully the military is a reflection of this, that there is more of a nuanced understanding coming, that it is not an all or none, because we all know that. We've all been in those spaces, and I think that's something that lands for every single one of us, that we've been at those times, and we know we can be rocking it and struggling somewhere, and with the right supports, we can get through that moment, stay well, get better, and keep rocking it even harder.
Absolutely. I tell this to people a lot when they ask me, hey, how were you able to do everything that you did and still have those struggles in the background and still thrive? And I tell them, being a 17-year-old girl, I was very impressionable when I first went into the military, but, there are a lot of people who are resilient. And we know that resiliency, it varies from person to person. And one thing that we used to say all the time in the Soldier's Creed is that I am trained proficient, mentally and physically tough in my warrior tasks and drills. And we used to say that all the time. It was sort of like embedded in us. We were conditioned to repeat that, to keep it in us. And that was in part on Army leadership. And Dr. Blaine, I wanted to pick it back up with you, because you said something very interesting on, just rocking it and still being able to do what you need to do, and about fitness. So what part or what role do you think that military leadership plays in helping to reduce those stigmas around mental health and encouraging those to seek care.
Yeah, and I'm with Nina. I mean, I think I've seen instances of, you know, these kind of things starting to change. I'm working with a group who's piloting some kind of very approachable mental health training with Marines, starting boot camp. You know, I've seen, you know, I've had the pleasure of speaking with ROTC, you know, folks who are, you know, about to be officers, right, as soon as they transition, folks who've commissioned. So I'm seeing these places where this is coming into the narrative, and there is that additional nuance of, you know, that it's, I think the way I think about it is resilience has been used as almost a dagger, right? That if you are resilient, you won't struggle, right? Like it's been used backhanded at people, as opposed to looking at it as we have this capacity, right? We have this resilience. That doesn't mean we won't struggle, doesn't mean we won't get injured, doesn't mean we won't feel something. It's our ability to overcome, right? And so if we can use the same ethos that we use, I mean, one of my, again, civilian, did not serve, but one of my favorite things about the military community and within every branch is that camaraderie, right? It is that strength together. And so I see behavioral health work in the same way, right? I'm taking my expertise in a particular treatment and partnering it with someone's expertise in their own experience. And together we are stronger, right? Together we can overcome that struggle. And so I think if we can reframe kind of what resilience means from you don't struggle to you get through it, and actually use that strength within our service to you get through it, and you use those resources and assets and supports available to you to get through it, I think that reframing that will allow leaders to see it in a different way and to actually work with these concerns in a different way when they do arise. So I see it on the horizon. It might be slow coming, but I think I'm seeing pieces really start to happen, because I do think there's a recognition that there are far too many losses that we have not needed to have. And so I think, unfortunately, it has taken that crisis to really spur people to think through, what do we need to do differently, because these are not people we should be losing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blaine. That makes perfect sense to me when you speak about progress. Even slow progress is progress. I tell people all the time that it takes one day at a time. Usually, change does not happen overnight. We understand that because if change is going to happen, time has to be a factor in that. We know that time things don't just happen instantly, although we would like them to. They do not. And there's sort of this idea that when it comes to reducing the suicide rates or reducing the stigma, that we're sort of like on this treadmill instead of, on a steady incline towards process. When you're on a treadmill, the scene really doesn't change for you. You're just going up through, the speed is changing, or maybe the incline is changing. You can slow it down, you can speed it up, but it's just rolling back and forth. And Pete, you being one of the top ranking officers in the military, being a major, I want your hindsight on that question. So what if back then, when you were serving in the military and someone asked you as a leader, hey, what can you do to help reduce some of the stigmas and encourage your people under your leadership to seek care?
Well, thanks for the question. And I was more lower middle management as a major, but hey, we are who we are, right? It's a long way from E1 to E7 and then O1 to O4. So, but getting back to the way things have kind of progressed, and call it a slow boil, call it what you want. From the time I joined in '89 to the time when we hit global war on terrorism, there really was, we weren't doing anything. There was no such thing as a suicide prevention class or anything like that, just for historical perspective. And we could talk about progress in the military in a lot of ways, but what we're focusing on with mental health, I can tell you that the biggest change that I've seen, and especially the last 10 to 12 years, I retired in 2021, let's say from 2010 to that time, is pre-command courses now focus much stronger on failure to act. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to be with It could be just, some kind of toxic, some kind of sexual harassment. It could be a lot of different things. But with that is also your mental health struggles that your soldiers are having. And failure to act was really, it was never a thing. I mean, it was just the command discretion. Now it's commanders are actually being held accountable for not doing the right things for their troops. That's my military perspective from it. And I've seen it grow and grow right to the time when I got out. And I think it's actually a priority now. It's like everything else when we're trying to fix things that have been wrong for so long or just ignored. It's taking time for it to integrate into the community as something that people take seriously. But I would say we've come a long way, and I'm proud of the fact that we're finally we're going in the right direction. That's the most important thing.
Absolutely. We are headed in the right direction, especially when we have discussions like this. I'm hoping that if there is a military leader or any leader in particular watching or listening to this webinar, that they understand their role or what could be a very significant role in reducing a lot of the stigmatizations in the military. Nina, speaking of being that support system and seeing it on another end, what are some things that you think Eric would say if someone was to ask him, hey, Eric, what do you think the military leadership could do in order to help people be encouraged to speak up and also to take care of themselves?
I'm trying to think, what would Eric say? So Eric has always been a real advocate. When he was a commander, definitely there was a lot more like what Pete was saying around sexual violence and prevention and child abuse prevention. We had a lot of things with family advocacy. I was the family advocacy program manager for a while when we were in Schweinfurt, and we did more parenting classes, couples communications classes. So I think on the education side and the prevention side, there's always been a lot going on. But I'm encouraged by what Pete's saying in terms of the, noticing what is happening and then the intervention and then the postvention. What are we doing when, not on the other side of it. But Eric, he is a strong advocate, and I think he hasn't had a lot of mental health struggles himself, other than so it surprises him when he does. I'll just say that. So like there has been in more recent times where he was like, wow, I feel sad. I'm like, interesting, Eric, but just naming what's going on for him, naming the feeling. But Catherine and I have consistently struggled, just to put that out there. So I, for a time, especially when you're in a high stress situation, I was diagnosed with something called cyclothymic disorder, which is that rapid cycling, kind of a mood, it's similar to bipolar disorder, but it's in a shorter range. So you have more rapid cycling highs and lows. Absolutely. But definitely that the depressive symptoms, and he never could understand it. He really couldn't. He was empathetic. He wanted to help, but he couldn't understand it from his own perspective. He hadn't experienced those kinds of things. So he gets afraid for people. So that fear, I think, for others drives him to connect with resources. So he knows Pete, he knows people in the community. So he's really a fast connector of noticing what's going on with other people and connecting them with the resources that are out there. So that's more his approach. But for Catherine and I, we're living with it. And Catherine saying to me things like, I can't get out of bed. I don't feel motivated. I don't want to do the stuff that I need to do. We get through it. We do get through it, and it's hard sometimes. And I think it's hard for him to be with us when we're having a hard time.
Very, very interesting perspective, and very interesting you're sharing on your experience personally with you and Catherine. And that is why I wanted to take it from Pete to you, Nina. You always offer something different for us all to think about, being a military spouse and your own unique experiences. And I wanted to have Reverend Ben, being an active leader in the community, go ahead and close us out on this one. Reverend Ben, any thoughts, feelings, or opinions on what Nina has expressed to be her experience. I think you're still on mute.
When Nina was speaking, I don't know if you saw me, I was nodding my head.
Yes,
Because I can relate to a lot what she was saying, especially the restaurant piece. Whenever I go in a restaurant, my back is never to the door. I'm always looking out. Now, being an older gentleman and the society we live in today, my head is always on a swivel.
Always
On a swivel. Not only did the military affect me, but also society. I was involved in a shooting about 5 years ago, but the Lord protected me. But somebody was trying to kill me, and that made it even worse. These kids out here today. But nevertheless, what Nina was saying, like I said, I can relate to that whole situation, and also I want everyone to know that the military is a separate society from civilian life. And it's things that go on in the military that they would accept. The vice versa, it's a whole different thing, a whole different beast, And I think there needs to be, we need to bridge that gap. We need to bridge that gap because there's resources the military may have that are not available to civilian life or vice versa. It's just a whole separate society, and sometimes even often a secret society, really. And it's a lot of damaged people who are walking around with smiles on their faces. And I'm gonna say this, I love the military, but sometimes I found myself tolerating the military. Tolerating, because I was in some experiences in some places that you had to man up or go down, because you didn't want to be the guy that was crying. You didn't want to be the guy that was scared. You couldn't be that guy. You'd be an outcast. You could be that guy that was depressed. You couldn't be that guy. And that's the truth about it. Yeah, there's a lot to be said about mental health in the military. There's a lot to be done. And I'm glad we're having this conversation today to kind of open some things up, because as we're speaking, there are things that everyone is saying that is opening something in me, because we all have similar experiences. Because like I said, the military is a separate society in itself, But, you guys really, really have been encouraged me just by listening to all of you. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. And it's always something powerful when you are able to relate to someone else's story. Our stories aren't the same, but they are similar. History doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it does rhyme. So we can all have an open discussion and be comfortable with sharing our vulnerabilities. A lot of people say, I don't want to be vulnerable, showing any type of vulnerability is a weakness, but we all understand it to be the opposite, vulnerability to be a strength. And Pete, I have to always look over at you whenever Reverend Ben is speaking. It seems like he always says something that kind of triggers a thought or an emotion in you. And he spoke about bridging that gap. And I wanted to swing this next question over to you, Pete, with Memorial Day coming up next week and Military Appreciation Month being this month. We see a lot of people, they observe Memorial Day and they celebrate Military Appreciation Month. So Pete, why do you think it is important to observe Memorial Day? What does it mean to you to honor those who have served?
If you notice a reaction on my face with bridging the gap, I agree with Reverend Ben. We need to bridge it. But the problem that I have is that people actually think there's a gap. There's no gap. There's no gap because this is an all-volunteer service. And the one thing, Darcy, I'm trying to condense this as much as I can because I'll get real long-winded really fast, is that there's an agreement when you join the military that you trust the American public and the people that they elect to use your life, because you're basically signing over your life, and they're going to send. I've said over and over again out loud, I thought the Iraq War was one of the biggest disasters, personally, philosophical, strategic, you name it. But I still had to go because that's an oath I took, because it's all about me trusting the people that were elected. And really, everybody's got a part in it, and they pretend like they don't. And I think that's a really tough thing for people, for soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, when they come back from overseas. It's like they trusted you, and now they trust you to take care of them and take care of their family. So the gap is a fallacy. There is no gap. Everybody in this country had a part in it, whether they want to admit it or not. And I'm sorry, I feel very strongly about it, but that's why, at least if civilians who have absolutely nothing to do with the military understand that we're not bystanders. This is a democracy. That's why we sign up. We have a trust, and that's I think that's a little bit of the hard part of being somebody who served overseas, and some of the things that we've all been through together, whether it's here CONUS or OCONUS, is that we're still that there's still that level of trust, and there really shouldn't be a gap. So we should all at least take the time to understand that those people who died, those service members that died, they did it trusting the American public.
Very, very interesting, Pete, because I think what you've done there in answering that question is take what Reverend Ben said about bridging the gap and having it more in a perspective where there's a knowledge gap, and not so much as like a social gap or a physical disconnect between everyone. And Reverend Ben, I thank you for saying those words exactly that way, because this is what people probably, those who, like you said, Reverend Ben, who have no type of military affiliation, do not understand about observing Memorial Day, or what it means to, appreciate the military community. It is separate. It is different. It is very unique to society as a whole. And Pete, I thank you so much for your passion there, because when you speak of things in such a way, we're all empathetic. We're able to feel and understand exactly what you're speaking of. So yes, Pete, there may not be a physical or social gap there, but in the same sense, Reverend Ben, yes, there may be a knowledge gap there as far as bridging the two societies, to say that we are here for a commonality, and that's on the continent and the country that we live in. So I would like to thank you both. Pete, very quickly. So I hear you speak a lot about those who have died while serving. And I wanted to ask you this very specific question about it being our honor, or do you feel, since we're in your feelings here, and I would like to stay in your feelings for a moment, do you feel, Pete, that it is our honor and our duty to not only recognize those who have died while serving in combat, but those who have died while serving on active duty in general, no matter their cause of death? We see stories about service members who have died while training and training exercises. We have all heard we may have all heard the story of Vanessa Guillen, who was murdered by another service member, a duty member of hers. And we all know that people they die every day. So Pete, do you feel that it is our duty on Memorial Day to honor those who have died while actively serving, no matter their cause of death, especially those who have died by suicide?
Yeah, and it goes back to the whole idea that you sign that piece of paper, you raise your right hand, you take an oath, and when you die and you're in uniform, or you're serving, absolutely, Absolutely. And by the way, Reverend Ben, I do agree with you that there is a gap. I'm just saying that it's I think it's something that kind of has just developed down the line, and it's an easy way for people to protect themselves. And yes, Darcy, 100%. You know, it's when you take that oath, that's what I meant by you trust people to do the right thing.
Thank you, Pete. Dr. Blaney, thoughts, feelings, opinions?
Yes and yes. As I was listening to Pete, I was thinking, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, we've already talked today about the suicide crisis, and so thinking about, you know, Memorial Day being a time to honor those who both die in uniform as well as those who die as a result of their injuries in uniform. And so, you know, I personally think of suicide very much as a piece of that equation. Pete and I talk with folks a lot. We've lost 4 times as many service members to suicide as we have to combat in the last 20 years, which is abhorrent. And, whether we think that is service related or not, we know that literally every demographic of service member is at higher risk. Every demographic of veteran is at higher risk for suicide than their civilian counterparts. So there's something going on that we need to figure out. And, for those families, was it service related? Was it not, that their strong, Marine, their soldier, their sailor, they came back injured. And so that's something that we need to honor, just as we would honor. I was sharing recently, my best friend's father had Agent Orange exposure in Vietnam, and he died probably 3 or 4 years ago now due to complications related to his diabetes. He was taken early because of his service. He's not going to get to see his grandson graduate from high school because of his service. And so, I hope that we think of all those who died as a result of their injuries, or presumption it's the result of their injuries, whether it was decades later even, right? He should be with us and he's not, and that's on us, right? We did that. We put him there and we need to take care of his family.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Blaine. Very, very interesting thoughts on honor and duty to those who have died while actively serving, no matter the cause of death. We understand death being something that is very taboo to talk about sometimes. However, with Memorial Day approaching us, I did want to highlight that there are going to be many people around the country who are going to sit and honor those who they love and share their life with, who have served, that are now no longer here. And as you said, Dr. Blaine, there are some people who I can take accountability and ownership as a member of this society, an active member of the community, that we put them there. And Nina, I see you over there kind of decompressing, and I want to give you a moment to, kind of catch your breath, get your smile back before I loop you back into our discussion. Since we're on the topic of duty and honor and service and support, there are a lot of people who they would want to be a lot like you, Nina, and able to support and do what they can whenever they can for the military community. And also, if they are living and serving side by side with a service member, but they're not sure. They're unsure what they can do, how they can do it, what's the best way to approach. There are many people who just say, hey, thank you for your service. But that is very surface level for them, but that's only the way that they know how to do it. So from a social perspective, and also from your personal perspective, Nina, with supporting military, what are some educational points or advice, tips that you would give someone who wants to support and engage, besides just a thank you for your service?
That's an important topic. And I think it's so individual. It depends on that person, what their relationship was like while they served, after their service. I interact with people who don't want to acknowledge their service. They don't want to say or talk about it. And then you have other people who are wearing the hat and have the pins and they're out there and they're part of the community and they're actively promoting that they were in the service. And so I think just being conscientious of that, similar to, any kind of interaction that we have with somebody, is letting them lead the story. So you recognize that they were a veteran. Oh, tell me about your service. Oh, can you tell me more? Just being curious, I think, is always a really great way to start, instead of making assumptions or, jumping in, and for sure not asking detailed questions from your own perspective. When I say be curious, I mean open-ended curiosity, and allowing that person to share, not like, so did you see such and such, or what did you do? Did you kill someone? Like, stop it. Stop it from asking those types of really pointed and directed questions. Not helpful. Not helpful. So always approaching it from an open-ended curiosity of, tell me more. What was that like for you? If it's appropriate to do so. Otherwise, taking the cue from the service member of if they do or don't want to engage. And so asking permission to even ask questions, right? Like, could we talk more about that? Are you interested in telling me about your service? You can even do it that way. A lot of times Eric's answer to the thank you for your service, when you show your military ID to get the discount or whatever it might be, is just thank you for paying me. It'd be his quip back to the person, which kind of piggybacks on what Pete was saying, is we're all part of this together, and it sort of throws people off and they don't know what to say in response to that. So I think being conscientious and being curious and just waiting for the response and not prying. That's what I would say.
Absolutely. That is very important. People understand that I am very open about sharing my experience, what I've been through. There's a reason for that. The main reason is that I almost died with my negative thoughts and feelings, believing that I had to, and I didn't. I see that now. that I didn't. And what I want to always project out into the atmosphere is openness, is connectedness, is, as Pete said, to piggyback on that, we're all in this together. And as Reverend Ben said, that it's just a bridge of community between all of us. And sensitivity is something that a lot of people, they aren't sure about how to approach or, tiptoe around. I know that you and I, Nina, we've recently had a very, very brief discussion around DEI and what that's like and what's going on with that being such a hot topic and what's going on. And Reverend Ben, I know that you have listened to many veterans come on the podcast and speak about their experience as a service member of color and what they've been through. And, yourself being a man of color. And this is a very diverse panel of all of us. Like, we have men, women, people of color, LGBTQ. That's me. I check a lot of boxes myself. But I did want to briefly give you all a moment to discuss the topic of DEI in your respective areas of service. Reverend Ben, you're with the church. Dr. Blaine, you are in the clinical psychology aspect. You're also a clinic director. Nina, as our licensed clinical social worker, and you're teaching at Newman University. And Pete, you being our boots on the ground out there as the outreach. So I'll start with Reverend Ben on this one about what are some highlights around DEI that is happening in the church?
Right now, in my particular church where I serve, in the community that I serve, it's people who are struggling, people with problems, and there are some people who would not even address those people because sometimes the church gets caught up in the church. But I believe that we must go outside the doors and we must take ourselves and meet people where they are. And that's one of my gifts. And there's also problems with mental health in the community, stigmas in the Black community, and also in the church. There's a lot of stigma about mental health. There's a lot of undiagnosed people walking around. You know, me being I'm studying to be a clinician. I'm working on my degree in psychology, so I'm getting a taste of it all, and all the books that I read, I see myself also. So I believe by in doing so, it allows me to be more of a help to somebody else. We gotta know who we are first. We gotta know who we are. But I don't want to change the subject, but I wanted to say this because we talked about people who have died. There's also those who have died outside of they're no longer in the military, but like me, I was in Camp Lejeune where they had the contaminated water. I've had to have my stomach removed, and I'm in a chronic. I'm always going through something in my body because I don't have a stomach. And there's some who have died. There's some who have died because of that. And it's not until recently that the government is even recognizing it and allowing us to get compensation. Because for a long time, it was just ignored. But I'm glad somebody finally took a look at that and opened it up for us to be compensated. And there's other things, other ailments and things military related that happen after you get out the military. Some of it is even mental health. But what I want to do with the church is be a beacon in the community to start a conversation. Because one of my goals is to start a mental health resource center in that community where we can offer counseling, anger management, conflict resolution, parenting classes, financial classes, life skills. You'd be surprised at what we take for granted people know. So it's things that the community is crying for, all these resources. And that's why I'm called to do this. We all are called to do this. If you're not called to do this, we shouldn't be here. And and I'm committed to it. I'm really committed to it. And yes, it is very important for the church to be involved because the church used to be a place where everybody ran to when they were in pain. Back in biblical days, when somebody was sick, they didn't stay home in bed. People carried them to the temple. We need to do that again in the community. We're caught up. I tell people all the time, don't believe the hype. You get caught up in the hype, and it's an illusion. And if we would humble ourselves, really, and really be open-minded more, we could succeed a whole lot more with our mental health and the things that I do in the church. By me having an experience, and I'm gonna say this and shut up, of addiction, because I'm kind of open with my stuff because I have a testimony. I've been through drugs. I've been through an addiction, affliction. I've been through it, incarcerations, jails, institutions, and almost dead. So having that experience in my life, I can understand a little better. I can see why I went through that because now I'm able to help people who are going through that. I know the demon when I see it. It's a spirit in every drug. I see it. And I'm identifying with it. I think the church as a whole needs to be like that. The whole church needs to be like that. We can't turn our backs on the people outside the door.
Thank you, Reverend Ben. Somewhere I read where two or three or more shall gather for a common cause, that it is a social aspect. Somewhere I read that. And Pete, you being someone, our boots on the ground out there for outreach, I'm sure you have gathered with two or three or more in a social setting there. So what are your thoughts on DEI as far as outreach?
I'm sorry, Reverend Ben.
No, go ahead. I want to hear what you have to say.
Well, so first off, I, as the only white guy on the panel here, just the whole military experience, especially getting deployed to a country with nothing but, brown people that, I was having in the middle of military action, and occupying their country. It's a little bit of a unique perspective. So when the bullets are flying, they really don't pay attention to what color you are, what gender you are, your sexual preference. And within the first 2 months we were on the ground, we lost a woman of color that we had, trained with on some communications equipment in Fort Bragg. And it didn't care, that IED didn't care about who she was or where she was from or how she lived her life. So I don't care when I go out looking at, whether it's a pride festival, because that's where I think veterans are going to be, that's where I'm going to go. And I think if anything, there are some places and on the other end of the spectrum, I go to gun shows because I know that there are going to be veterans there. And they all have earned the right to be heard, and they've all earned the right to seek help. And it's a very complicated, especially just like I said, from my deployments, just the way I look at it, because I feel like in some ways I've been part of the sin, doing what I've done, even though it was on behalf of the American people. So yeah, it's complicated, but I just know that I'm going to go wherever veterans are, because they signed the paper just like me.
Absolutely. Pete said he's going to bring the equity and inclusion to the diversity. I heard that, Pete. So thank you for that. That means a lot. Dr. Green, you and I have recently had the privilege of meeting with the DEI specialist of the National Guard, Mary Allen Lossman, and she said something that was very interesting to me during our conversation. She said that her mission focus would be equity and inclusion, to allow diversity and access to take sort of a path of least resistance. And I wanted to get your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on DEI from a clinical perspective, being as though the Cohen Clinic serves a lot of National Guardsmen who are people of color.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of echoing aspects of what folks have already shared, it's such a huge task, right? And I think, for folks who have never worked with somebody in the military or worked with veterans, I always say, like, you have never met a more diverse group of individuals, right? Ever. So I think people do have this kind of stereotype and look at the military as this monolith that it is just absolutely not, and it is more than reflective of the diversity of our country, right? So we know that, individuals who serve are more likely than their civilian counterparts to identify as LGBTQ, right? They are more likely to represent, racial and ethnic diversity. And so I think when we think about how do we take care of such a diverse group of individuals, right? The thing we can center is understanding that military cultural competence and affirming, right? So folks don't have to come in and explain, right, what little terms mean, kind of what does it mean if I was, in Fallujah versus the Korangal Valley? How do I, just take some of that labor out, right? So that folks don't have to come in and at least explain those aspects of their experience, right? Basic versus AIT. If they're in the Guard, they're, 2 weeks a summer, a weekend, a month, right? Like really taking those aspects out. So at least those common denominators, those pieces that everybody goes through, we can take that out of the way. But after that, everybody's experience is unique. Actually, everybody's experience of that is unique, but the structure is the same. And so I think on the clinical end, that's our charge, is to really make sure that we're doing our pieces, we're doing the homework, we're trying to take that lift out as much as we can. And then we are looking at, for that individual, given their experience, what they were coming in with, who they were, what, their particular unit looked like, what their individual experience looked like. It's all individual from there. And that's really relying on that person's expertise, and making sure that we have those understandings. Like, unfortunately, yes, we know that there is racism alive and well within the military. Not every single place, doesn't show up the same way all the time. But when somebody says, I was discriminated against, I was treated in this way because of these pieces, we hear you. We affirm that happened. We're not going to question that was the case, right? If somebody says, yeah, I know Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed, but I don't trust that. We understand why that might be the case, right? Something that was only repealed in the 2000s, that feels like it's from the 1900s, right? So we've got to really kind of bring those, at least those kind of meta layers of understanding of what could have impacted somebody's experience. And then the other piece that we do in the clinic that I think is really important, at least for us as a team, is kind of looking at, we are a diverse group of individuals serving a diverse group of individuals. And so I think the other piece that I take, and I think the team really takes to heart, is making sure that our space is as equitable and just as possible. So, we're looking, we've actually been doing like a 2-year deep dive, and it's going to be long work. It's going to be forever work, but making sure that we're looking at, really important markers like pay equity, hiring, recruitment, training practices, right? How are we really making sure that our space is as safe as possible for our team members, because that's going to ripple out into the impacts that, how are those people then able to serve and be present and stand up for those that we're serving. So as I've got my kind of clinical hat, but there's also that leadership hat. And I do hope that we can each, to whatever extent we can, I think we can each take that into our spaces and kind of just take a look at some of those things that we presume, and especially, around issues of power, kind of where can we power share, where can we kind of look at things from a different perspective, and really make sure that we're getting that feedback from all angles, from all team members, because that's certainly helped us to grow. And again, our mission is always front and center, right? Whatever helps us to better serve our veterans, service members, military family members, we're going to take those pieces. It doesn't matter who it comes from on the team. If it doesn't matter if it's from a partner, if it's from a client, we want all voices heard and lifted. So thank you. Complicated question, but I really appreciate you putting it out there.
No, I thank you all for taking the time to answer the questions and be open to having this type of discussion. I know that this is not something that people usually do all the time. I wanted this specific webinar focused on those difficult conversations so that people can understand what it means when a diverse group of people like ourselves here today, when we work together with another company such as Voice and Vision and Compare, and we all come together for a common cause. It's not our differences that is at the forefront, but it's our commonality. And it is also our differences that make us such a stronger force. And I wanted to highlight a lot of the things that you all said. We have a few minutes before we close, but I wanted to highlight, Nina, you being so open and sharing not only your perspective, but the perspective of Catherine, if she could have joined, and Eric as well, and what it means to serve as a military spouse. And that's just not alongside the partner, but that's alongside your children, that's alongside yourself, that's alongside the entire community. And Pete, you still out here doing major things, although you're not a major, and I understand that you may be in a funny spot there on the chain, but I want to extend my appreciation to you personally for the things that you've included me in, and the outreach things that you and I have done together. You're absolutely right to hear you say that it doesn't matter where the veterans are, that's where you are going to go. I've seen you do that, and I've seen you do that with me. So yes, the equity and the inclusion, it already exists. To the tools that we have to succeed, we have them, we just have to use them. And Pete, I thank you so much for bringing equity and inclusion and access to diversity. I think that's probably how is the best way to approach it. Reverend Ben, you and I've only had the pleasure of speaking in depth this one time, but I do hope to speak with you further and work with you a lot more. I think that you have a lot to offer as far as your insight, your experiences, your professionalism, and all of the things that you do to serve the church, the community, the veteran community in particular, and also people of color. It's always nice to me to have a discussion, an open discussion with a man of color in our community. I don't think that we have a lot of that type of dialogue that's not centered around like toxicity, but centered around what we can do as far as solutions to our social issues and our social problems as Black men and Black women, and also include Dr. Leah Blaine, who is someone who is just everywhere these days. Sometimes it's hard to catch you, but I'm always grateful to have you because you said you always loop me around. I would not know Voice and Vision. I would not know Compare had it not be for you making this connection here. And just before we close it out, I know it has been a very in-depth discussion, but we still have about like 3 minutes. Is there anything that either of you wanted to leave the audience with about any of the discussed topics?
Darcy, oh, go ahead, Reverend Ben.
I just wanted to say that I enjoyed the discussion because, like you just said, Darcy, there's solutions. And I think that this whole discussion, this whole project is working toward a solution. Mm-hmm. And I'm a person who wants to see change among people. I don't want to help a man stay the same. I want to help a man to change. You know, I feed homeless people, but I would love for them to be able to feed themselves.
Teach a man to fish. I'm with it, Reverend Ben. Nina?
Darcy, thank you so much for bringing us together. I think we all highlighted it in a different way, but healing happens in community. Healing happens when things are integrated. Healing happens when we come together. And so you starting this conversation, bringing us together today, and everybody highlighting the community and the supports. I just really appreciate being part of this team. Thank you.
Thank you, Nina. Pete?
You're muted, Pete.
There I go. Sorry about that, Darcy. No, it's a pleasure to work with you, Darcy. And, you know, I appreciate you being there for us every step of the way. And I can't think of anybody more valuable to our board. And just, it's been awesome. Yeah. And so many things that you said, just like, I'm like, wow, I was just writing about that, you know, and even like the thank you for your service. It's like, I think just my final words is that this is one holiday that we really, you can't say that to somebody who's not there anymore. We just have to remember them. And it's one day where the American public can't just say thank you for your service. You actually have to feel something.
All right. No, of course, Pete. No, thank you. Thank you for being here. And again, thank you for highlighting that. That is very important because we are coming up on Memorial Day. And that was actually a specific question that was brought to me from Valerie. And I thought that was a great question for you specifically. I did tell her, I said, man, my guy, Pete, he's going to take this questionnaire home. So thank you for that. Dr. Blaine, what you got for us?
Yeah, I just, you know, we did a lot of academic talk and I think also a lot of sharing, which I really appreciate. And I'm just noticing for myself, just sitting here and having this conversation, tough as some of the parts have been, like, I am just like, I can feel the pride and the gratitude that I have, even just to be, you know, working alongside you all and just knowing. So when we're talking about purpose, we're talking about meaning. It is such meaningful work and it is such a privilege to be able to do it. And I hope that, you know, anybody listening who's struggling or concerned about somebody struggling, you know, I think anyone who gets involved, you know, as Reverend Ben said, like, if you're not feeling this, then like you shouldn't be here, right? Like anyone who's here is here because they care. We're up for the hard work. And that theme that just keeps resonating, like we are so much stronger together. Mm-hmm. And yes, this is work, but this is personal for every single one of us in different ways. And so I hope that, you know, that community, as Nina said, like that's where healing happens. We can offer that to each other. So whether it's your calling or your job, or really it's probably both, any way that folks seek that community, seek that support, is only going to help them be stronger. So thank you so much, because this has been just a wonderful space of meaning and purpose and community for me this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I know that it was heavy. So as promised, I did want to lighten it up before we get out of here in the next 5 minutes or so with some military trivia. So I hope you all are ready. It's only 2 questions, and feel free to answer as a panel or an individual. So the first question here on military trivia with Darcy is, how many branches of service are there in the military? How many branches of service are there in the military? Anybody want to take that? Take a crack at it, or we can name them all together. I see you all thinking there. Pete, what you got? He's like, yeah, I know it's the Navy. What you got?
I can only screw up here. 5, right?
5? No, there are more than 5. All right, what we got?
And we got a new one.
Yeah, we got a good one.
Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. You have the National Guard, you have the Coast Guard, and the Space Force.
Okay. Yes. So there are 7 branches. You do have the Marine Corps, the Coast Guard. The National Guard is its own branch. The National Guard is its own branch. You have the Air Force and the Space Force, the Army, and the Navy. Sorry for the Navy being last there. That was not intentional. All right. So our second question here is Memorial Day was previously known as what when it originated in the years following the Civil War, before it became a federal holiday in 1971. So Memorial Day was previously called what?
It's Armistice Day. I'm not saying that right. How do you say it?
No, it's something very simple. Anyone else? Any other guesses here? I know our audience they're probably Googling it right now. But it was Decoration Day. And this happened in the years following the Civil War. We understand that after the Civil War in North Carolina, there were a group of soldiers of color who wanted to honor those. It was 180,000 men of color joined the Union Army to serve in the Civil War. And after that, they wanted to, in the spring, that's why Memorial Day is celebrated in the spring. The Civil War, Pete, as you understand, and we all know, the Civil War ended in April. And here we are in May. And they wanted to honor those who served on the Union Army. So they called it Decoration Day, where they would go and decorate the headstones or the plaques for the colored soldiers in the Union Army. So thank you all for being here today. I did want to close with a quote from a very famous orator, or we want to call him the father of psychoanalytic, Dr. Sigmund Freud. He did say that nothing happens between the therapist and the patient besides the exchange of words. And that's because there is no surgeries, there's no invasive procedure. The only thing that you are invading is that person's thoughts and feelings. And that only happens with an exchange of words. And words were originally magic. They held power, and words have the power because they provoke thoughts and feelings, and action takes place after that. And I wanted people who are watching this to understand that there is power in discussion, there is purpose, and there is meaning in getting together with a diverse group of people, not just those who share similar thoughts and ideas to your own, but those who have different thoughts, feelings, and opinions than your own. It's always a good thing to hear someone else's perspective to provoke those thoughts. And I don't want anyone to depreciate the power of meaningful and purposeful discussion, such as what we had here today. So thank you all for being here. And I hope that we can do this again in the future, if it's not surrounding this type of heaviness, but also, meaningful discussion and conversation surrounding any topic regarding the military or the community in general. And we'd also like to thank Valerie and Sherry from Voice and Vision, and our friends at Compare who were able to secure the grant and the funds that we could bring this to the community for free of charge.
Thank you very much, Darcy. How fabulous was that? My goodness, I have a page and whatever of notes. Dr. Blaine, Pete, Nina, Reverend Ben, absolutely amazing. It's important to have these conversations. And I'm hoping from this point that it will start many conversations in many circles. I love what you said, Pete, about trust. Yes, my son went to Iraq and he still won't talk about it. And as a Marine, he's always a Marine, once a Marine, always a Marine. And I just am amazed at when we we as people need to honor people that go. And you went for us, and you could have lost your life. We need to honor the people that did, that gave their life. We need to honor the people that went, that came home, and we need to continue to honor them. And today, what we really heard, I feel like, is about getting, having people be embraced and receiving the help and identifying how we can connect with each other to get that help. Like you said, I really loved what you were saying. It was so much about connection, so much about overcoming together. We believe at Voice and Vision recovery is real, and that hope and connection saves lives. That's what saves the lives, really, the hope and the connection that we do with each other. And so thank you so much. Thank you to the Cohen Clinic. Their information is going to be on our website. You can also search them, but we'll have a resource page along with this webinar. Just click at the bottom and you'll see all the resources. Please reach out to them. Voice and Vision is here to help you as well. Anything that we can do, please visit the Untold Valor podcast and listen and share it. We do have everybody's story is different. And so it could impact anybody that you might come in contact with. Nina shared her family member story too. So it's not just veterans, but it's veterans' families as well. So please visit that. We are so grateful to you who are watching. And if you have a story to share, please contact us. We'd love to hear your story. If you want to be part of another webinar, Darcy, you did such a fabulous job. I think we should have you do another one. What do you think?
Thank you. Yes.
Anyway, not to put you on the spot, but I love also the fact that we're talking about diversity and how it's really important, and how we can all come together around one common topic and share our views and be united in the fact that the Cohen Center, Voice and Vision, and those that we partner with want to see people get help, want to have the helpers become the helpies become the helpers, because we have all walked in these shoes in some way or another. So thank you so much. We appreciate you. We appreciate the listeners. Cohen Clinic, amazing, the work you do. We're so proud of you and so great to serve with you. Reverend Ben, thank you as well from Voice and Vision. And we're going to sign off now.